Hi, once again, welcome to Pages Promotions Indie Reads TV. I am Diana Catherine Plopa, your host, and I'm really excited to have in the studio today my dear friend Richard Gair. He's a wonderful guy. I've known him for a couple of years. He submitted to one of our very first anthologies that we did years ago, Right to Woof. And we've kind of been on Facebook and literary kind of pals ever since. So I'm excited to have him in because he's a different kind of author, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, Chris, welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm a different kind of author.
You are a different kind of author, and I think that that's a good thing.
I'm not going to argue.
The reason that I say you're a different kind of author is because, first of all, I think you're a very courageous author because some of the subject matter you write about is not something that you see in mainstream, particularly LGBT literature. It's not as widestream as it could be, as I'd like it to be, in fact. I'm all about inclusivity to the nth degree, so I think what you're doing is very, very courageous in the way you're approaching it. The other thing that I think is really cool is that you, in your writing, do this wonderful thing where you walk two lines. When I read Falling Awake, which is this one, look at that, I pushed the right button. When I read Falling Awake, I was really captured by the gentleness and the sincerity of it. I don't know if I was supposed to get that, but that's where I was with it. I thought that there was this real special, what's the word I'm looking for? Just this gentleness about it. I didn't think it was an in-your-face, I'm going to throw this story at you, live, die, or otherwise survive. But I thought there was a gentleness about it. And I thought that there was a true sincerity about it. It didn't, when I read the book, it didn't seem to me to be work, or it didn't seem to me that you rushed it or that you felt that you had an agenda. It just felt like a very natural, I have a story and I'm going to tell it kind of thing.
Falling Awake for me, up to this point in my writing career, I started off with a historical novel that one of my former high school teachers, who unfortunately just passed away this year, had come to me with, and I wrote a historical nonfiction novel, went solo, and I wrote comedies. I didn't even realize at that point I haven't had a sense of humor. I really didn't. I did not know until I was halfway through the first book.
That's funny, because I think you're a pretty funny guy.
I just didn't realize I had a sense of humor. I didn't know it was going to come out. So I had written 3 comedies. I was part of 5 anthologies that were all comedies, and I think it was towards the end of the 4th book that I had written, which was a comedy. My father had been diagnosed with advanced Alzheimer's. And I stopped writing for a while, with the exception of the anthologies that I was contributing to, because I would spend time being a caregiver with him, come home at the end of the day, and I couldn't write. I just could not do it.
Sure, you just spent, yeah.
And I think in 2015, it was the beginning of 2015, I kept thinking, all right, it was my father's last year of life, which we didn't know at that point, but things were coming to a head, and I kept thinking, what am I going to do? I needed to start writing something. And I thought, well, I had all these little plot bunnies in my head, and I still travel extensively with my husband, and I love writing in an airport. I will sit there for hours, and I will just write nonstop.
I remember before 9/11, I used to go to Metro Airport and write a lot.
That's phenomenal.
It was great. People watching, for the atmosphere, just the opportunity to unplug for a while was great. And then 9/11 happened, and they don't let you pass that checkpoint anymore, which I was pretty sad about that. But
well, when I'm waiting 3 hours for a flight, I get there early, get something to eat. So I would sit there and I kept thinking, since I write in an airport, it'd be neat to just set a story in an airport, but, how can you make that remotely interesting? I was walking through Atlanta, the downstairs part of their airport. I don't know if you've ever been to...
I've been there once, yeah.
Usually I take the tram, but one time I was downstairs and I was just walking the whole way. And I had this weird sense of deja vu. I'd never done it before there. And I thought, okay, so airport, sense of deja vu, this character, maybe he just wakes up and has no clue who he is, where he's at, what he's there for. So I had the beginning in my head. And the funny thing is, after writing the first chapter, I wrote the very last chapter. So I knew exactly how I wanted it to begin.
Oh, that's cool.
I knew exactly how I wanted it to end. And I thought, well, this is a short story. I'll just start with a short story. And it turned into something a little bit longer. It was not the full-length novel, but it was, as long as it needed to be, it turned out to be a novella.
Mm-hmm.
And I also knew at that point, too, because it was just a novella, I didn't want to work with a publisher because I didn't think they would publish a novella. And I thought, okay, well, this is a really good opportunity for me. I will learn what it takes to hire a cover artist. I'll find a cover artist.
Yeah, and I gotta say, this is a really striking cover. I just love this.
This was the second cover. The first cover was, I published this under my pseudonym the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I started deciding I was going to publish under my real name, I wanted a new cover. I approached a cover artist whose work I really enjoyed. I interviewed with her. She liked me. I liked her. I said, what can you do? I'm not going to micromanage it. You tell me what you come up with.
Sure.
She came up with it. I cried the first time I saw it. It
Yeah,
captures a beautiful
I
moment.
remember seeing the original cover, and I like this so much better.
I fell in love with the cover. She just really captured something
She truly
out of
did.
the story
Yeah.
with it. So I thought, well, okay, I'll hire my own cover artist. I wanted to work with editors who I wanted to work with for a change. And I thought, sink or swim, this is going to be on me.
Sure.
And when I published it under the first version under my pseudonym, I didn't know how it was going to do. I'd written only comedies. So people read it, and there were a few people who had emailed and said, you know what, I read it the first time, and I went back through thinking I missed something because it didn't have the usual snark and the usual comedy in it. But it turned out to be the most reviews I've ever had on any of my books. And people really, they found something they really connected with, which I didn't expect. To me, it was a novella. There were parts of it I was pouring a little bit of myself into.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it had to do a lot with my dad's disease when he was passing. And there was just more emotion than comedy that went into it.
Yeah, like I say, I found a real gentleness. I remember I sat down and I read it in one sitting. And I read it in one sitting because I didn't want to leave those characters. They just felt really comfortable to me, and I wanted to know what was going to come next. I didn't have a sense of urgency. I didn't have a sense of, there wasn't any tension or drama. It was just comfortable, and I felt like it was a natural storytelling. Was that something that you did purposefully, or was that something that happened organically through the process?
That was organic. I knew that I was going to have this character meet other characters.
Mm-hmm.
And originally he was going to meet 8 or 9 characters, and each one of them was going to tell a story.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to the third story, and I was sitting there, and I'm like, okay, I can force myself to write this. This doesn't feel organic anymore. I think I can just reduce the number of stories that we'd have to tell and just leave it with the basics that we need to know.
Sure, yeah.
There was a neat little part that there's a character in the story named Martha.
Mm-hmm. I remember.
He meets basically in the airport. She kind of is the waitress at this diner.
Mm-hmm.
And originally when I was writing it, I kept thinking, oh, who can I just see in this particular role? Somebody who's older than myself, who you could have a conversation with, and you just know there's wisdom there.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I don't know what to name her. And I'm going to call her a friend. She's kind of a pen pal friend, Martha Davis, lead singer of the Motels.
Mm-hmm.
I kept thinking I had Martha in my head based on some of the email exchanges we've had. And I thought, heck with it. I'm just going to name her Martha. We're going to let her look like Martha. We're just going to leave her in there, and I'll come back to it at the end of it. When I'm doing my editing, I'll change what I need to.
Mm-hmm.
Got done with it, went back, and I'm like, I'm only seeing Martha in this now. I can only picture Martha.
Right,
so
yeah.
I thought, So I emailed her and said, this is what I've got. Would you like to read this? Can you tell me if this is okay? She read it. She loved it.
That's great.
She loved it, and she did me a very, very big nicety too, where she had some song lyrics
Mm-hmm.
that she made me a deal with that I could use in the beginning. So I was able to use some song lyrics, which I'd never been able to do before.
How
And it was-
wonderful.
it
What
was
a great
beautiful.
gift. Oh, my gosh.
It was
That's
extraordinary.
That's an incredible gift. So now the second book has come out.
Which was never supposed to be a book. There was
what
never,
was it supposed to be?
There was never supposed to be a second book.
Okay.
A couple of my author friends had read the first one because I'd asked them. I said, I don't know if I've got something here or not. Can you read it? Tell me, what do we have?
Mm-hmm.
So they read it, and a couple of them, a good friend of mine, J.P. Barnaby, who's a prolific author in her own right, her comments to me were, no, 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 you can't end the book this way. I'm like, well, I did. That's- she says, well, what happens next? People are going to be upset. They want to know what happens. And I thought, you've got all the information you need to know exactly how the story would progress.
Mm-hmm.
But apparently I was wrong. So I'd taken a shower one night, and I'm like, all right. So I pulled each character in my head, and I was having a little conversation with them, like, no, we've told your story. Next, break this person up. Next, go. One of the characters I brought up, kind of like, we told your story in the first book, in short as it was. Next, and character just kind of stayed there in my mind. I'm like, okay, good. I'm having a conversation in my head with a character that won't leave.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times that happens to me.
That's a problem. So
it means you're supposed to do something else.
the character just said, well, what about my story? I said, well, we told your story. He says, okay, well, this happened to me when I was 10 years old. I said, yes, the character, what happened to him was he was 10. He says, what do you think that does to a person at the age of 10 when something like this happens, this traumatic?
Mm-hmm.
How do they grow up? Ah, crap.
And so a sequel was born.
Technically a prequel, but I figured in order to find out what happens after the end of the first book, you really have to know what you're up against. So in the prequel, in the second book, I show you exactly what you're up against. I could tell you in the third book, hey, these are some very bad people.
Mm-hmm.
You could take my word for it.
Mm-hmm.
But if I don't give you an example, if you really don't know what you're in for, it's not going to have the same impact.
Right. So is there going to be another book in this series, or are you done?
Well, I was waiting for you out there a little while ago.
Yeah.
I'm in the process now of doing my edit on the third book.
Oh, extraordinary. Grand.
So that will hopefully go to my overhaul editor in the next couple of weeks, and she will rip it apart for me, just like I want her to do.
Right.
She does a phenomenal job. I had met Eden Winters on one of the comedic anthologies I was on, and she is just extraordinary. And what she can do in writing to a page of mine, I love every second of it. I love every edit she gives me.
Isn't it spectacular when we find partners that really bring out the best in what we do? And as authors, I find that I tell this to people all the time. They say, what's the most important part of writing a book? And I say, the editing part. If you don't get the editing part, the rest of it is done.
Oh my God.
But you really have to find a really good editor that you can partner with that understands your story vision, can talk to your characters the same way you can, and create the best outcome.
The other part of it, though, too, is the writer community itself. I thought I knew a number of writers, but I think it wasn't until the last 7 years that I really branched out. I mean, one of the folks I met earliest, her name is G.A. Hauser. This is a prolific author, 1 book a month.
Wow.
I don't know how she does it.
Yeah,
I wish
don't
I could
either.
do it.
Yeah.
I can't. She's extraordinary, and she is one of the most open, most supportive people you will ever meet. Patricia Logan. I met Patricia through G.A. Hauser. At the conferences I was going to, I met like Kieran Kelly, T.C. Blue, Eden Winters, Allie Blue, Shay Connor. Just extraordinary people. We're still friends today. We still talk. I still go and see some of these folks from time to time whenever possible. And they are just, if you've got an idea, they'll talk it out. If you want to run something by them, they'll look at it. And they'll give you their unfettered opinion.
Yeah, I really love the... computer's not happening. Here it goes. I really love the writing community. I think especially here locally in Michigan. I found that to be true as well. I know that you're connected with writers countrywide, but I found that just in the last couple of years, the Michigan writing community is so strong and so vibrant and so welcoming.
That's nice to hear because I don't know that many authors in Michigan.
Yeah, I've found that the Michigan community, every time I turn around, they're like, what can I do to help promote your work? How can I move you forward? Today on Facebook, we had a whole, I don't know if you saw the thread today on Facebook. It's like a shout out to your favorite indie authors kind of a thing. And we're always supporting one another, and I find that that's really important. And it sounds like you found the same community.
I did. I would like to get more in touch with the Michigan authors. I started to do that with the previous anthology, and I will never forget this to the day I die. The one time I told you, oh, yes, I'll be there, and then I completely forgot and didn't show up.
Yeah,
I thought,
things happen.
That was incredibly professional of me at that point.
Sometimes, life intercedes when we don't realize that it's going to, and it just showed it's not a big deal. We got you back the next time, and it was okay.
Yes.
So,
yes.
I wanted to talk about the other 2 books because they are quite a departure from Falling Awake. at least I think, because Falling Awake is a much more serious kind of contemplative thing. And this one are both the more humorous things that you did under the K.J. Allen pseudonym.
There were 3 books under the K.J. Allen one. That was the very first one. That was my very first solo novel.
And then this one?
That was the sequel.
Okay. And then I don't have the third one.
I didn't get a chance to send that one over. I'm having a little trouble finding some of my files at home. But no, a funny thing happened the way to my sexual orientation was originally meant to be this very, very surreal journey a character took in college.
Okay.
And it was not supposed to be funny. And I wrote
But it ended up being funny.
It did. I wrote
How did that happen?
small sections of it, and when I went back to it, because I went and wrote the historical book first, went back to the notes that I had for A Funny Thing before it was called A Funny Thing, and I'm like, oh no, I need some background information with this character. I need to put this in there, and I need to put that in there. And after the first 100 pages, I went and reread it, and I literally went, oh my God, I wrote a comedy. I didn't see it when I was writing it. It was never meant to be one. And I just kept going, this is not what I wanted it to be. It just turned into something else. So I finished it, and it kind of got termed in as a coming out novel. And the character does come out, but it was not written to necessarily be a coming out novel. And I couldn't figure out what to call it. And I was at Media Play one day, back when Media Play still existed. And I'm looking through VHS tapes. That's how long ago it was. And I was looking. I'm like, I don't really want to look at musicals. But I'm like, oh, funny thing happened on the way to the forum. I'm like, funny thing happened on the way to my sexual orientation.
Yeah.
There it is, right there.
And there it is, right there.
And there it is.
Who did the artwork on this?
I don't remember the cover artist.
Okay.
I still work with that publisher. I could find out.
Because I love especially this one. There's something just really super snarky about it that I really like.
I had fun with it. I had fun with the sequel too. I discovered halfway through writing the sequel that I got the main character's last name wrong. For some reason, at some point, he switched to Andy Richards. And I was reading it, and I'm like, that doesn't seem right. And I'm looking at the first book. I'm like, did I goof up and call him something wrong in the first book? No, I was completely wrong halfway through the second book. Like the second book.
Again, this is why we have to have really good editors to help us catch these things.
But after the Andy Stevenson one, I thought, well, I could write a third book, but if not enough people have read the first two, you really decrease your audience by going into a third book. And I thought, I had this idea in my head that with my husband is half Chinese, and the banter with him it's nonstop. It's a lot of fun. He was home a couple weeks ago.
Right. You guys took a trip. I saw the picture with the dog.
But when I got up at the bathroom, I was having trouble with some vertigo,
okay,
which is inherited. I want to thank my parents for that one. But I got up one morning and I knocked something over in the bathroom, and he got up and he's like, Chris? I'm like, no, it's fine. He's like, I thought you fell. I'm like, no, I knocked something over in the sink. He's like, oh, my poor geriatric husband. I'm like, really? He's like, are you done in there yet, Godzilla? I'm like, so I thought, okay, I'm going to have a white Asian couple, and I'm going to make them like super spies. And I'm going to make this comedy with the two of them having to interact with each other and have to be on the same mission together for the first time in their lives, having to work together, and just let it fly.
And this is where this came from?
Actually, that was the third book.
Okay.
This was just a sequel to A Funny Thing.
Okay.
But the third book, which was called Gailius Operation Thunderspell, it was nonstop one-liner after the other with the two of them constantly bickering, getting on each other's nerves. And unfortunately, that book, I head hopped quite a bit, and I didn't even know what head hopping was back at the time. So despite the head hopping, people they laughed a lot in that story.
I would think that head hopping would serve that comedic style, being able to jump back and forth like that.
Yeah, you have to. In comedy, you really can get away with it. It's not something I do now. I couldn't get away with that in Falling Awake. But I'm still learning. As I'm writing each book, I am still learning, especially with Eden editing. She's like, okay, this is the second book, and you're kind of still doing the same thing you did in the first. I'm like, I am so sorry. So the third book, I'm like, okay, how many times did I use the word was? Because now I'm going to eliminate 80% of them.
So I got to ask you that this is something that has intrigued me as long as I've been reading books. It's a two-part question. So the first question is, why did you choose a pen name?
Okay.
And the second part of that is, why did you decide to go back and eliminate the pen name and use your real name?
When I started wanting to publish, we're talking, I started writing the books back in 1995. Didn't publish for a while, but 1995 was a very different time to be somebody who was gay.
You're very different.
It was not, there's a lot of issues today, but they were tenfold back then. And my husband was not out at that time at all.
Okay.
So he knew if I was going to publish,
It would definitely impact him.
It would impact him, and I didn't want to. So I thought, well, he and I have the same middle name, just a different spelling, which is how the Allen came about.
Okay.
So I thought, I'll use his middle name, and I'll take my initials, which are K-A-G. I'll add an E, therefore got Cage Allen.
Got it.
So that stuck with me. Back in 2017, I mean, we're talking 2013, my father-in-law passed. 2014, my mentor passed. My mentor I worked with in college, Milton Ford, who is the reason I am a published author today. 2015, a good friend of ours passed, an author friend of ours, Dorian Gray out of Chicago, he passed. My father passed in November of that year. 2016, a very, very good friend and former boss passed. And 2017 creeps around, and I think I was really kind of depressed, going through depression, having to deal with all of these deaths.
Yeah, no, that would be a lot for anybody to deal with over that short a time span. That's amazing.
So my husband and I were talking at that point, and I think a lot of these things were creeping up into my life. I didn't quite know how to deal with them. So he and I had our little trial and tribulation that year, and one of the things that came out of it, he said, you know what, I think it's going to be healthier from now on. Just instead of dealing with two personas, let's deal with one.
Just be us.
Let's just be us. Let's deal with one. I will start publishing now under my real name. And I thought, you know what? It's time. It's been 20 years. It's time. So that's why.
Well, and now the community is a lot more receptive to your relationship with your husband, your marriage. Now, marriage with gay people is something that's much more accepted. We don't even think about it anymore so much. At least I don't.
It's a different world now than it was then. So I'm more comfortable with it. I'm comfortable using my real name. People are going to find you and they're going to look you up anyway.
Right.
You're going to always deal with that.
Yeah. I always thought my biggest suggestion for authors who say, should I use a pen name, should I use my real name, I've always advocated for real names because when you're at a book signing and you sign the real name, it can be catastrophic. Or somebody calls you from across the room, you don't answer, it can be a problem. So I've always said, you know what, if you're not 100% a separate personality and you can switch hats like that, use your real name.
But I'll tell you this, a week ago, I received an email on Facebook from a gentleman who I believe he was an author. I think he was an author. But I had done a convention. It was like a book fair out in California. He was there. We had taken some pictures together. I was with J.A. Hauser at the time. And I had put them on my website back at the time when I was still a regular blogger. This gentleman went and he applied for a position somewhere. I don't know where. It may have been in education.
Okay.
They did a little check on him. They looked him up on the internet, and they found these pictures where he was at this particular fair, and he was at a table with erotica.
Okay.
They rescinded their offer to him.
Based on that?
Based on finding a picture. And he had emailed me, he says, can you please take these pictures down? I'm like, God, I didn't even know I still had them up. Absolutely not a problem.
Yeah.
Something innocuous as being at a table with a couple of people surrounded by, I don't write erotica.
Guilt by association.
Yeah. He did not get a job position.
That's terrible.
You know what? If you're going to have to use a pseudonym, use it.
Yeah.
Just do it for the right reasons.
Right. On a more, we just have a few minutes left, about 3.5 minutes left. On a more personal note, and this is something I've been wanting to ask you for a while because it's conspicuous by its absence. You used to have a staff that brought you tea for breakfast every morning, and I was kind of enjoying the morning report, as I like to think of it. What happened to your staff?
I have gradually been thinking about what to bring back. There were things I was doing, too, where I had these pretend texts with his grandmother in Hong Kong. And
the Grand Monster. I loved that.
But it got to the point where she's getting a little bit older in age. Things are cropping up health-wise, and it felt very disrespectful to keep doing to her. And I thought, all right, let's do away with that. And I took myself off social media for about 6 months. and I'm gradually still kind of going, what can I do? What's acceptable? And I have to be careful now with work and everything else. And
Right.
eventually these things will come back a little at a time.
Although I have to say that the occasional work-related stories that I get to see are pretty wonderful. I mean, I'm not going to be specific because I don't know what your rules are, but you work at a local hospital, and I was fortunate enough to be a guest there not long ago. And it was very comforting for me to see those posts when I was laying in bed checking email in the morning, because I went, oh, look, the whole world hasn't collapsed. Chris is still having a good time at work. You know?
I don't like being in a job where you're going to be depressed or nobody doesn't have a sense of humor. I've got good people I work with. They're phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
And there are occasions I take liberties with conversations, but I post them. People appreciate having a sense of humor about, the healthcare industry.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So the last question, we just have like a minute and a half. I often get questions like, what's the worst advice? What's the best advice? What would you possibly tell somebody up and coming? I guess my question to you is not to put too fine a point on it, but because it is different, is there a special something you would tell an LGBT author that they should either do or not do, specific to that genre?
Specific to that genre, I'd say, well, first of all, when the writing, write for yourself. Don't write for an audience. I don't write for an audience. I write for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Second, work with a publisher if you can. Why? Because they are going to teach you about editing and how important it is.
Yeah.
Don't rely on yourself to edit. There's a lot of books that get put out on Amazon that are complete and total crap.
That's true.
They're not edited. It's poor. Learn the basics before you go out on your own. That's the best thing you can do for yourself. Make something that's quality.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that
Appreciate it.
you came in.
Loved it.
I've just started reading Falling Awake 2, so as soon as I'm done with that, I'll post my review, but so far I'm really enjoying it.
You'll be drinking by the end of it.
I need to say one more thing before we go, and that is, small confession, you were the first real author I ever met in person.
You
So
poor woman. You need to set your bar higher.
But I appreciate you being so kind to me in that initial meeting and just making me feel so
My pleasure.
warm in the community. I appreciate it.
Absolutely my pleasure.
Have a great night.
You too.